What's up, YouTube? We are going in again on a video that I have not seen, and that's how I love to do it. I love to do it like that.
You didn't actually want to do this video, I'm just saying.
Yeah, because I don't know what it's about.
The channel's probably
I can't really do an intro because I don't know what it's about. But
you already know what it's about, man.
I think it's going to be pretty good. It's not going to be boring, because if it's boring, I'm not downloading it. I'm just letting you know that right now.
Still can't call it down. It's uploading, man.
I mean, I'm not uploading.
Learn the terms. Let's get this goddamn video before you ruin it.
This video was sponsored by The Great Courses Plus, a subscription on-demand video learning service. If you want to find out more, stay tuned till the end of the video. It's often told that the middle child is the one left ignored. The same analogy can be used for 3 American wars.
Whoa.
World War II was the oldest, the ascendancy for a new golden age. Vets that fought came home to admiration from a victorious nation. 2 decades later, Vietnam was the opposite, the start of a turbulent time. Those who fought came home to a broken nation. Some were hated, and their war was despised. But between those 2 vast extremes, there was another war. It wasn't loved or hated, just there. The Korean War. Eventually, it just came to be called the Forgotten War. Today, it's often not even taught. Only time I learned about it in school, in detail at least, was in my 8th grade literature class. That was it. In history classes, it was just a footnote. But millions died in a footnote in history, including 30,000 Americans. And it left us with the fat tyrant who occasionally starts things, at least in the minds of the public. So since it's not often taught, what started the Korean War? Why does it matter? This whole thing starts before World War II. Korea was once an independent nation before being annexed by Japan in 1910. The Koreans were subject to awful treatment and oppression, but they were powerless to rise up. 30 years later, in 1945, the Japanese Empire died and the American and Soviets divided it among themselves, until actual elections would be held. And good thing that worked out so well. Just kidding. Right next door, China had fallen to communism, and emotions about this were running very high. Domino theory and all. As tensions grew, plans for united elections became a bit less existent. The UN attempted to grant free elections, however the Soviets blocked that real quick. By the end of 1945, Korea was left in an odd limbo, split north and south, both wanting to unify, but stuck under the thumb of a much larger conflict. One, a Soviet puppet state, and the other, an artificially created democracy. There was an attempt to start an internal government by the Korean people in the south, called the People's Republic of Korea. This only governed the region for about a month. The problem was they were pro-communist. The American military quickly smashed its claim as a legitimate government. The Soviets to the north recognized the legitimacy, not that it mattered. In Pyongyang, the Soviets found Cho Man-sik, a local leader that the Soviets saw potential in as a leader for a united Korea. By December 1945, the Soviets and Americans agreed on a trusteeship, which would give control of Korea to both nations for 5 years, as to guarantee stability. Cho, along with most of the Koreans, saw this as an attempt for foreign nations to force their own ideologies on the people, rather than let the locals decide. So pretty much most of the Cold War. The Soviets didn't like this type of thinking and put him under house arrest before he quietly disappeared. This is Stalin after all, so guess what happened? His leave of absence and or living meant that a new pro-communist figure had to take his place in North Korea. This new puppet was Kim Il-sung. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea was born. Meanwhile, in the south, the elections were held, and the Republic of Korea was born as well. The US military, seeing their mission accomplished, soon left. While Korea was now 2 countries of complete opposite ideologies, there was at least some sense of stability until, well, there wasn't. Kim Il-sung believed he could invade South Korea and unify the country under his rule. Nobody believed that the Americans would care enough to get involved after a massive conflict like World War II. After all, this seemed kind of unimportant compared to Nazis and Japan. The Soviets, fearing they'd get dragged into Kim's little war, said they wouldn't offer any Soviet ground troops if a conflict broke out. After all, Germany was still an issue, and that was a much better place to start World War III over. In 1950, the North Koreans, armed with Soviet weaponry, launched a surprise invasion into the south. The southern military stood no chance. The country crumbled, and all resistance was pushed to a small point called the Pusan Perimeter. Unluckily for Kim, America did care about this attack. They cared a lot. Kim picked the absolute worst time to launch a communist crusade. Domino theory was a growing fear. The idea that communism liked to spread. China had fallen, Russia had fallen, Eastern Europe had fallen, so preventing it from spreading was the only way. Under the command of a UN peacekeeping force, the US and several other nations landed troops into Korea. In the span of just a few months and a successful invasion of the city of Incheon, the US was able to push back the North Koreans with ease. Wanting to unify the country, the US and South invaded the North, pushing the communists out of Pyongyang and all the way north to the Chinese border. Keep in mind, China exists, and they were all too wary of a quickly approaching American force, which was pummeling a fellow communist state. Mao Zedong feared the Americans would not just stop at eliminating communism in Korea, and that China could be next. The Chinese invaded from the northern border, surprising the Americans. Waves of thousands of Chinese poured down the mountains, overwhelming the UN forces. What was meant to be a quick war escalated into a 3-year-long slugfest between the Chinese, North Koreans, against the Americans and the South. The Americans were pushed back, but were able to stop the advance. Just like World War I, the battle lines didn't really change for 3 years. Eventually, both sides were tired of conflict, and a ceasefire was signed. The borders of both countries were decided close to its original place by the 38th parallel. By now, after years of stalemate, there was no dancing in the streets for victory in Korea. There was no victory. It was just a boring ceasefire after years of stalemate. The public had paid little attention to the war at all. For the US, once the fighting was over, nothing changed. Vets came back and went back to their civilian lives. The 50s continued. That was it. Meanwhile, fearing another start in hostilities, the Korean Demilitarized Zone was created and separated the two nations with its massive security features. And since then, while divided, both Koreas went on their separate ways. South Korea went through constant turmoil, new governments rising and falling several times. The South was in economic ruin, abysmal conditions. Ironically, it was the North, for decades, that was much better off. The North saw better quality of life for its citizens and economic stability. However, by the 80s, the tables turned. The South became one of the most developed, richest, and successful nations on Earth, birthing a new generation of StarCraft players. Meanwhile, the North fell into a dystopian cult society, one cut off from the world, with concentration camps, poverty, and famine. Today we see the Korean War as
Oh, God dang it. Let me drop it.
Yeah, that was pretty long.
in conflict, if we
Exactly
even
what the
remember it
video
at
was
all.
for, right?
Today, when the Americans and South Koreans think of North Korea, it's usually as a joke. A poverty-stricken nation trying to be tough,
No.
led by a
Yeah.
fat leader
Yeah.
with a bad haircut. It's pretty easy to joke about. And after the 20-something war scare, constant threats of nuclear bombings, just like 60 years ago, it got old fast. People no longer cared. Ironically, even though it's called the Forgotten War, it's still ongoing. There was never an official end, meaning the US is still at war with North Korea. Even if the rest of the world treats the North with mild disregard, the North still sees the conflict from all those years ago as a constant part of its ideology. Generations born and raised to hate the Americans, a constant paranoia that they see the war will begin again, which explains most of their craziness. And eventually, something will happen to the North. A coup, a nuke, a civil war. Even if it takes years, North Korea cannot sustain itself. It will be an issue. It's just a matter of time. And the forgotten war of yesterday may be the war of tomorrow. This video was inspired by a lecture which was featured in the video service The Great Courses Plus.
That's basically it, though.
Did you like it?
Sure.
I think it was
Not the one I was looking for.
Yeah, I think it was kind of boring.
To you, of course it was.
You didn't stop it, did you?
Of course I stopped it.
Okay, let me grab my tea.
I didn't stop the video, man. Dang.
Huh?
I didn't stop the video.
Oh.
Want me to stop it?
Yeah.
Alright. End the video here. See, let me see if I can find the video I'm looking for.
Yeah, do one now.
Maybe.